Hello again, everyone, and welcome to part one of our lecture on chapter 10. Similar to the content that we covered in chapter 9 on intelligence tests, a lot of the content in chapter 10 is going to be applicable in very unique circumstances. And at a master's level, we unfortunately aren't able to teach on how to use abilities testing because a lot of these tests do require extensive training. But I do want to give you some background information on what ability testing, academic aptitude, and achievement testing looks like so that if you run across these things in your own clinical work, you at least understand what they are as well as understand or recognize what these tests mean. So a little bit of an introduction. Aptitude and achievement assessments are two types of ability tests that are used to measure one's capacity to perform. So, how well can you complete a task? How well can you perform whatever is being asked of you? And each of those, aptitude and achievement, are different things. So, aptitude tests are designed to measure one's capacity to acquire a particular skill or ability, such as how well someone is expected to do in college or graduate school. It's what we would expect based on what we can measure in them. Whereas including in aptitude tests, these are most closely evaluated in terms of predictive ability. So this is actually what many of y'all probably did to get into college, taking the ACT or the SAT, and hopefully y'all didn't have to do it, but taking the GRE to get into graduate school. Those are examples of aptitude tests where you're looking at one's capacity to perform a particular skill or acquire a particular skill, and we're using it as a predictor of how well someone will do in the future. Achievement tests, on the other hand, are intended to assess content knowledge or skills that are already learned, such as your current reading level or math abilities. And achievement tests are judged on content validity or how well the test accurately and completely covers a topic of interest. So where aptitude tests are used to predict how well someone will do in the future, achievement tests are really about, okay, I want to know how good you are at reading, I want to know how good you are at math or whatever you're measuring, and you're really assessing the validity of the test based on the content that it covers. Does it accurately capture the entirety of that topic? And I want to spend this first part of the lecture going into aptitude into a little bit more detail. So aptitude tests are particularly useful and common in educational settings. Specifically, scholastic aptitude tests are used as an information source for selecting and admitting students into institutions of higher education, both at the undergraduate and graduate professional levels. So a lot of times these scholastic aptitude tests are used to determine how much scholarship someone gets, whether or not they qualify for financial aid. It can determine course placement if someone needs to be placed in an advanced placement class or in an honors program. It can also determine athletic eligibility as well as academic and vocational mentoring and counseling. Scholastic aptitude tests really provide sort of the framework for being able to understand what that is. And maybe you can relate to this in your own experience in undergrad. I know at the university that I attended, they used I went to a Midwest university, so we took the ACT. They used your ACT scores to determine how much funding you got from the university based on scholarship. And the better your ACT score, the more scholarship you got. So I know that this tracks for my experience, and I hope that at least example lands for some of you and maybe your own examples, but also just in how scholastic aptitude tests are currently being used. And there are two common aptitude tests that are used in higher education admissions decisions at the undergraduate level, and those include the SAT as well as the PSAT and the ACT, the ACT, sorry. So let's go into a little bit more detail on the SAT. So the SAT was originally described or identified as the Scholastic Aptitude Test, but in its most recent revision in 2016, it was reduced to just the SAT. That's all that it is called. And it includes 4 major sections. So within the most recent revision of the SAT in 2016, It was completed over 4 multiple choice formats that include 4 major sections. So each of those major sections were reading, writing and language, math, and an essay, an optional essay component. The first 2 components, reading as well as writing and language, are combined into one of the 2 section scores that someone receives, and the math section is then used for the other section score. Each of the section scores that someone gets on the SAT range from 200 to 800 points, with a total sum section score ranging from 400 to 1600. Section scores, or sorry, I apologize. There are 2, as I mentioned, 2 section scores, but there are also 20 optional 1-hour subject tests that someone can take. And these subject tests fall within one of 5 general areas. And those include mathematics, science, English, history, and languages. And the optional subject tests are really used depending on the university that is requiring them. Not all universities require that you take a subject test, but they can be helpful depending on the university. We also have the preliminary SAT or the PSAT and the National Merit Scholarship qualifying test, which are really considered trial tests for the full SAT. And both of these tests, the PSAT and the National Merit Scholarship qualifying test, are typically taken in the 10th or 11th grade and are used to help students choose which colleges they should consider in their college decision-making plans. And especially for the National Merit Scholarship, it is used primarily for qualifying for National Merit Scholarships. Similar to the SAT, the PSAT and National Merit Scholarship qualifying test include 3 components. Those 3 components are reading, writing and language, and math. And the reading, writing, and language form 1 score, and the math forms the 2nd score that someone gets, and then they're scored in a similar form as the SAT. So that's one of the most common scholastic aptitude tests that are used. The second most common is the ACT, which is the American College Testing, which was founded out of Iowa City, Iowa, and similar to the SAT, it really got confusing what the acronym standed for, so in its most recent revision, it is just now called the ACT. And the ACT is more often used by schools in the Midwestern United States, probably because it was discovered and developed out of the Midwest in Iowa City. Though most colleges now will accept either the ACT or the SAT. As long as you have one of them, a college can use that to determine your admission to that university. The entire ACT test takes about 3 hours to complete and includes 4 academic achievement tests, an interest inventory, and a questionnaire regarding student backgrounds and plans. It's interesting because the ACT is only offered on 6 national testing dates every year. So you can really only take the ACT every 2 months, and it's on this, they are predetermined days, and you have to take them at a testing facility. The ACT assesses aptitude in 4 areas: English, mathematics, reading, and science reasoning. And there's also an optional writing test similar to the SAT, except that scores on the ACT range from 1 to 36. So it's a completely different scale that's used to understand an ACT score. And the ACT Incorporated or company offers other tests that can be taken prior to or with the ACT. Those include the UNACT Interest Inventory, which gauges information related to career planning, similar to John Holland's RIASEC hexagon of interests. And Holland's model includes interests of realistic, investigative, artistic, social, enterprising, and conventional interests. So the UNACT Interest Inventory matches career planning options for individuals based on their personality and based on their interests and how those match the interests of different careers. And there's also the explore and the plan tests, which both assess aptitude among students in grades 8 through 10, and the Asset Student Success System, which measures the community college and technical school student skills. So, again, these are additional tests that are offered by the ACT Incorporated that can be taken prior to or with the ACT in order to get a more well rounded assessment of someone's abilities as well as their aptitude. And the validity of scholastic aptitude tests are interesting because compared to one another, the ACT and the SAT are approximately equal in their ability to predict college grades. Specifically, the SAT and the ACT both yield predictive validity estimates in the zero point 0.3 to zero point 0.5 range when determining GPA during the first year of college. So they're okay in being able to determine it, but what most research indicates is that the best predictor of college grade point average is actually high school GPA. But that doesn't mean that ACT and SAT scores are still not important, because oftentimes we find that GPAs are context specific. So what that means is that the same GPA at different types of institutions can impact the predictive validity of aptitude scores for college GPA. If you have a 4.0 at a high school that is not very competitive, doesn't offer a lot of advanced placement courses or college level credit classes, then a 4.0 will look different for you than a large high school that has multiple college level classes as well as a much heavier competitive sort of spirit between students. Those GPAs will mean different things. So high SAT and ACT scores can be helpful when a student is trying to gain admission to a college, but their high school GPA might be low. The SAT allows for almost that adjustment to account for the GPA concerns, to say, oh yeah, like I have this really competitive environment and that's why I don't, like, you don't see it in my GPA, but look at my SAT and my ACT scores, like I'm scoring really high, so I should be granted admission. And as a counselor at a master's level, it's important to know that information, because you might have clients who are really discouraged by their GPA or really discouraged by their SAT and ACT scores. And for you as a client or as a counselor, it can be helpful to provide your clients with this information so that they can make an informed decision about how to move forward. It's also important to recognize that many college students will feel pressures from various sources, such as their parents, teachers, or even within themselves, to attend the highest status institution available. And then there's this expectation that once a student gains admission into these high status institutions, that they're supposed to maximize their potential and be at their absolute best all the time in these institutions. And the big fish, little pond effect relates to the notion that students who are placed in high ability environments will have lower academic self-concepts than individuals who are placed in average or low ability environments. So in other words, if you take someone and you place them in an environment where everyone is achieving at a similar level to them or even better than them, as a student, that person is likely to have lower academic self-concepts, which will then influence their performance. So this big fish, little pond effect implies that not all students should be placed in highly competitive environments, but rather students are going to perform their best when they are placed in institutions where their abilities will put them close to or above the middle distribution of student abilities at that institution. So that is where we are going to pause part 1 of our lecture on chapter 10. Join me for the second part of our lecture, where we are going to go into additional tests, specifically moving into the achievement tests. I will see you all in the next lecture.